Hey, Phil, G and Tears, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we're back. This is like a true two-part episode because we're talking about attachment theory, the psychological theory, right?
Yeah.
And we're looking at it in the context of our bigger picture theme, which is karma mudra, the use of sexuality, passion, love, eroticism, romantic stuff in the spiritual path. So
Yeah.
we're working on that. That's our theme of 2025 for sure.
Yeah.
And try to go for the positive. Go for the positive. And so, we wanted to talk about attachment with that, and we wanted to do a little bit of an Eastern side, which we did. We wanted to do a little Western side, psychological side. That's one of the things we try to do, I think, a little unique in our podcast, right, Daniel, to do some of the psychological stuff and
Definitely.
give
Yeah.
people that you can also use for your spiritual edification, right, as opposed to just the traditional stuff. So we had gotten to this attachment theory. We're doing kind of like a little primer, you might say, a little crash course on attachment theory, and we had kind of gone through part of it last week. So when we were recording, and so this next episode, whenever you're watching it, will be like part two of this. However you set it up, Daniel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what had happened was we had talked about especially two of the unhealthy sort of attachment styles, and had gotten to the point where we were talking about how the original study was with the kids and how they sort of acted, and then also kind of the parental situations that might kind of lead kids to have those kinds of attachment styles, right?
Correct.
How they bonded to their parents and how they emotionally attached and how that affected how they were trying to get those attachment needs, met. Kids learn this kind of young. So we had gotten through two of the major ones. Some of the kids will go through and they just can't get their needs met and they kind of give up. And the idea is that they become kind of avoidant, they withdraw inside. They're super nervous inside, but on the other hand, they look quiet on the outside, but they're super nervous on the inside, is the idea,
Right.
right? And it really has to do with like situations where the kid just has already kind of surrendered. I'm not getting my needs met, I give up. Right. And then we talked about another group of kids, again in the original studies, and then the kind of their parental thing was they sort of learn like my parents are erratic, maybe if I make a big noise I'll get my needs met. So they get very panicky and kind of jittery, more attention seeking behavior, right? And this is called kind of an anxious type. And they're always kind of like acting out and crying out, and they're trying to get their needs met through this kind of behavior. We're going to follow this through to adulthood in a little bit, but we got to the other third one, which is problematical, and that's this thing called disorganized. And this one, I think, you know, I said last time we were talking about this that I would try to get a little personal with this because I think I grew up in a house that definitely had this vibe to it. And so this organized kind is not one that they even really explored in the original sort of psych research part, but it came up later on, was added in, because you got kids who were very all over the place. They sometimes would seem to act like one group and withdraw and go inside. Other times they might like try to act out and seem like they were more needy to try to draw that parental attention to them. But they were very kind of inconsistent, erratic, or chaotic, hence disorganized. And the way that the attachment theory talks about them is that they never even kind of settled in on some consistent strategy. Like everything is so chaotic and they weren't able even to try to come up with because some consistent way of behaving to try to get these needs met. It just never developed in them. Probably because there was a lot of chaos in the environment. So I can say for me, I grew up in kind of this scary household, right? I grew up with like four adults in the household. We've talked about this in previous episodes.
Yeah.
And of that, like I had physical violence from three of them. I know people have had worse households than me. I know when I was talking with my psych mentor, Dr. Michael Schnur, at some point he said to me, like, well, you were abused. And I was like, you know, I wasn't sure. And I think that happens to a lot of people. You're not quite sure, especially if you know people who maybe have had worse experiences.
Mm.
But, I was physically assaulted by, three of the adults. And, you're a kid and you get attacked. It's obviously, it's a thing. And I think it was very erratic too, in the way that I think would lead to something disorganized with this. So when I was like, we're basing this a little bit on this book by Jessica Fern. She wrote this book on attachment theory. It's kind of
Hmm.
set in the context of like more like a polyamory thing, because we like to talk about different relationship styles. It's part of what we do.
Yeah. And we just had
Um,
on Phaedra Chantel, and we
yeah,
talked about, non-monogamy and attachment and everything else. So it's yeah, we're in this zone here.
yeah, we tried to like speak to the needs of all people.
That yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. And yeah, all right. So and looking at that, when I listened to it as an audiobook, I didn't read it as a book. But I was listening, I was like, interesting. I come from this household for sure.
Hmm.
So it gave me the chance to reflect and say, hey, how much of this disorganized stuff maybe did I have in the past?
Right.
How much of this has sort of been cured for me, you know, through psychological and spiritual growth, right? So I guess that's one of my goals with this, Daniel. I know how I'm sure you feel the same, but I'd like to hear it in your own words. But for me, I thought, well, in doing this, it gives people the chance to hear this set of ideas, hear this whole theory, and then maybe learn something about themselves by thinking, okay, did I come from an environment that was like that at all? Maybe I haven't thought about it as much. Oh,
Mm,
these are the kind of patterns that develop in kids and we'll trace it into adulthood. And it
right.
gives us a chance to all learn from this, hopefully, right? As
Yeah.
we're, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
because there is so much of our behavior that is patterned off of previous experience.
yeah.
And as much as we like to think ourselves unique, which of course we're all unique, are also, archetypes or trends, if you will, of, pattern behavior that, and because people go through similar experiences, because we're all human. We're not, our genes are what, 99.6% the same. And
Mm.
despite how different people might think themselves to be, we are all a product of the generation that came before us. You know what I'm saying? And I was having a conversation with a friend of the show, Aaron Greenberg, who was one of our first
Oh,
guests way back in the
wow.
day.
That's a blast from the past.
Blast in the
All right,
past, yeah. I
cool.
saw him today, so
Yeah.
we were chatting, and it was just one of these, brief conversations where when, if you have children and then you allow your parents to watch your children, you get to see how your parents parented you.
Yeah.
And so people are a product of the previous generation. And so pretty much around the world, post World War One was a kind of a worldwide depression almost. And so that kind of mindset was then, input into the into the baby boomers, and then how they treated their children, i.e., Gen X and older millennials or whatever, has a direct effect on how we are and how we would influence our children. So the one of the multiple points that we're always trying to impress upon people is that the book, it didn't start with you, which is true. And I like to mention the shamanic aspect of, like, it's genetic. You know what I'm saying? Things get passed forward. Okay, stop. And then now what? Now the onus is on the individual, which, like, probably and this is just probably how it was. The baby boomer generation doesn't do a lot of reflection. Those folks are kind of rare in their self work. The people who stood out and became teachers, was not common. Therapy was not common. The, kind of spirituality, or it's not popular now, but at least it's more popular than it was then. Meditation, it's a business. You know what I'm saying? Yoga is a huge business, right? Psychedelics is pretty popular in the lexicon of, standard discussion that people are aware of. I mean, hell, weed is legal in many states. You know what I'm saying? They use psychedelics for research. So I'm just saying we're opening up these conversations for people to do what it is I believe our responsibility to do, which is learn yourself. And so by having this conversation, which is, yes, based around attachment, but then if you look at where are the first place that we had attachments, it's with our parents. And so as we grow in our life and we have more attachments to friends, other family members, loved ones, coworkers, so on and so forth, these are different manifestations, obviously, of attachment, but the dynamic still plays out. And the way in which, how we're highlighting it has been, brought about by research of many, many people. And so if people can get insight into themselves and the way that they interact with the world, and then, i.e., really themselves, it's illuminating, and people, I believe, can be empowered to make change if they decide to.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because like my parents were even like pre-baby boomers. They weren't even baby boomers yet. They were like these silent generation people. Men were men, and they
Sheep were
bottled
scared.
everything up. And what was that?
I said sheep are scared.
They probably were. Uh, as well as many kids.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, baby boomers, maybe they had their kind of hippie vibe, some of the Beatles and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. All right. So on this thing, if you relate to this at all, I'll share, what our author Jessica Fern is saying about this,
Yeah.
sharing some of her stuff, sharing some stuff around this. And to the extent that I can talk about this from my own experience, I'll do it. What the hey, it's Gin and Tantra. So we do that kind of thing. So the big thing about this and this disorganized thing, the way this works out is that it's supposed to be that the kid is faced with kind of a paradox where in a normal attachment thing, you when you feel threatened, afraid, stressed, you turn to a parental figure to be a source of comfort. But the problem, if you come from a household where the parents are unpredictable and abusive, potentially in this way,
Mm,
is that the main person that you want to turn to is also the person that's causing you the main problem.
right.
So it's almost like the wires are like fritzing out, you know, in these young organisms, us as young little beings,
Mm,
you have some wiring there and the wiring doesn't know what to do,
correct.
right? The extent that these things are kind of like programmatic, they get screwed up, right? Like the way the ducks imprint on the guy we were talking about last week, like
The
the whole
wild,
famous
wild
image.
robot.
Yeah, the whole idea of that um, is just, there's a certain programmatic aspect to this, is the way this is going to be talked about. And now the program's all confused. And so, and she does a good job of describing this as sort of one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake,
Mm,
where like you want to go to this person, but you have to flee from this person at the same time, but you want to go, but you got to flee. You don't know whether to put the car in forward or reverse, maybe
right.
would be another way to put this. Where am I supposed to go? Which way should I go? And it really creates a lot of internal kind of chaos, especially like if you go fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? What do you do?
Yeah.
Right. So the whole thing is kind of screwed up. And the idea then, what I was kind of sharing in my own house, and it was like, it's so strange because I think when you talk with people who come from crazy households, emphasis on the word crazy, it's like people do very weird shit. They're unpredictable. You don't know what's going to set them off, what they're going to do. And you and I both work with patients,
Yeah.
right? And when you actually have conversations with this, we talked about it a little bit before. They try to show abuse like sometimes in films and things, but it always looks a little too stereotypical.
Hmm.
And the way it actually plays out is just weird. Like, we hear stories from patients, different kinds of abuse, and when
Yeah.
you actually hear, you're like, oh, that's just weird. It's just so strange that people
Mm,
would act these ways.
hmm.
But it's not even like stereotypical on some level. That resonates with people who might be listening, because we all have our own backstories. You have to come from a house that was difficult, you know. You can kind of it's good to say those things out loud so we can all kind of nod
Yeah.
along and go, oh yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah.
I've heard tales of abuse and sexual abuse where like that's just so odd that anyone would behave that way. So, anyways, so the parents are supposed to be frightening, threatening, disorienting, alarming, unpredictable. And so they're just erratic and confusing. And also, maybe sometimes they're nice and some other time they'll attack you and you can't predict what's going to happen.
Mm,
So you're very thrown. So that whole thing of like the chaotic and unpredictable behavior, that just freezes people. And she talks in the book, this again is Jessica Fern, the author that I was sort of using for my part of these notes.
yeah.
And she was just describing a patient where everyone was kind of afraid of this patient's mother, even though they're adults. And so they'd be at like a family gathering, and all of
Mm,
a sudden, the mom would start acting crazy. And even the other adults didn't know what to do. They all froze. And so it's that kind of like unpredictable behavior. And she said, for her patients, sometimes the mom could be nice, other times the mom would be incredibly hostile and vicious. So, anyways, it really messes with all the mechanisms.
right.
So, when I read this thing for myself, my throat's getting a little tight.
Mm, that's real, man. It's real.
It's very real. Yeah. So when I was listening to this thing, I was like, okay, I can acknowledge that this is the space I come from. And some of it is just, odd. I'll share a little bit of something that jumped out from the book because she also mentions this thing when kids are asked to solve the unsolvable things.
Mm,
So the kid is put in some situation where they're given a task way beyond their means to do it, and the
right.
kid just can't do it, and then the parents pissed off. And my brother doesn't like to be talked about, so I don't ever talk about him. But I'll talk about him this one time
Mhm.
because we would get these weird tasks with my dad of one of the three people. Now I love my dad, but definitely issues on top of his issues. And we laugh about it now, my brother and I, because it's just so odd. So my dad would have be doing some family project, like he liked to rip down walls and beat things up and rebuild parts of the house. That was how he vented probably a lot of his anger, to be honest. And he'd be doing some kind of project. And if you can just visualize this, it's a tiny kid. My brother was maybe, he's 6 years younger than me. So for him, it was really impossible, but it's impossible for anybody. You could be like fucking Schwarzenegger combined with like any other, John Cena or whoever. You couldn't do this task, which was my dad nailed a 2x4 to another 2x4 and just put a nail in it. So the 2x4s are rocking and spinning. There's no stability in this. And my dad would ask, I can't believe we laugh about this, my brother and I can't help it, but we would be asked to like hold up a big piece of drywall
Oh man.
with this 2x4. And my dad would be trying to, hammer this in. And like you'd be sitting there like, shaking and like, there's no way because there's no stability in the thing. It's a
Right.
single nail holding a fucking 2x4. And my dad would be screaming and you'd be like trying so hard because you could get super pissed and like he wouldn't throw the hammer at you maybe, but the hammer might go flying across the room and who knows what you would do. And I like that resonated so deeply when I got to that part because we were in those situations like all the time.
Mm,
Do this impossible thing, and I brought it to my brother. And again, I think there's a certain like dark humor, obviously.
sure.
You look back on things and you laugh, but it's not the worst thing we went through, obviously. I think my throat closes because I had one of the relatives who tried to jam eggs down my throat with a spatula. My throat gets funny. G&T, we'll talk honestly. But in any case, that wasn't like the worst thing. But when she brought up that unsolvable problem, we could give a long list of things where like you just couldn't do this.
Right.
And then you have enraged adults getting upset with you.
Yeah.
So, so being challenged in ways and then adults getting mad at you or being undermined. And then she gets to the end of this, she just talks about sort of like family chaos, is just sort of one of the big things with this. And there was a lot of illness in my family and just problems between the couples where they were constantly fighting with each other, you know, and so that's another thing she brings up. To get to the end, I know you got anything to say about this? I'm kind of going through the general theory, but I don't want to.
No, I mean, there's, no.
Okay, all right, so cool. I mean, if
Yeah.
you have patience or something you want to share about, but yeah. Um, so she also mentioned some things like, like the highly sensitive person kind of theory, the HSP
Yes.
thing,
Yeah.
where maybe you get people who are just super sensitive and everything feels chaotic to them. So even if they maybe didn't come from the most difficult households, because of their particular levels of sensitivity, whatever there was of chaos within the house, just they felt it more deeply. And then they weren't sure how to like handle that. And then that leads to something where if you're a very sensitive person in this way, you're feeling the feelings of other people, but the feelings of them are confusing and it disorientates you, especially if you're highly sensitive to the emotions of others. And then
Yeah.
she gives some final examples of people who have physical illness when they're young, that makes you very vulnerable and not sure how to attach to the world.
Mm,
And she kind of closes with the idea of like people who might have more severe allergies, even where everything is potentially a danger and you're not sure what you should do with yourself. Should I go forward? Should I go back? Do I have to be afraid? Am I free to just play and be easy, or do I have to worry? So she does a pretty good job of walking through like, okay, here's the main idea, and then like little like other possibilities that might have happened to people. So
yeah. Forgot to,
oh, you
didn't,
got a little light on this,
yeah, I
shine a
forgot
little
my
light on the
light better.
subject.
So, there's, what did I want to say? In in any relationship, or we'll say in any attachment, right? There is two, we want to be dualistic, but we're going to say there's two sides of things, at least in what we're talking about is one person and another person. And there's usually someone who's a little bit more of the leader and someone who is a little bit more of the follower in almost every attachment, right?
Okay, yeah, there's a truth to that.
And the percentages are going to change based on adulthood, relationship, and it could switch and so on and so forth. Fine. But there is a dynamic there. And in that dynamic, there are some obviously psychological aspects at play, but then also physiological aspects at play. And so I'll do one as a child and one as an adult, since we're going to move into the adult kind of stuff
Yeah,
here
yeah.
in a moment.
Hmm.
So I like to share this because I don't think that this is common knowledge, right? And so, and it certainly didn't come from me. It comes from many different traditions, the cranial sacral therapy being one of them. But the child uses the adult's nervous system to gauge the safety of the outer world,
Hmm.
i.e., the safety of the inner world. So if the adult is always out of sorts, is what's the word we go disorganized,
Hmm.
the child then A believes that the world around them is disorganized, which it is. Okay, fine. But in a different kind of a way that it's not going to be okay. It's not going to be all right. It's disorganized. Anything could happen at any time. You have to always be on edge or withdrawn, right? There's no middle ground because that's how the parents are acting in this way, right? They're reactionary. So that's kind of on one hand. As you move then to an adulthood and you are partnered with somebody, and whether you're monogamous or polyamorous, you're with a pair.
Well, no matter, even if we're talking about our tantric relationships, you can be with somebody.
Yeah, you're going to be with
Yeah.
someone. So, and depending on your relationship, that is also occurring. The people's energetic fields, right? And the body is an electromagnetic um, field that is there's electricity going through the body, therefore there's magnetism around us, right? Whether you want to believe in an aura or not, everybody has one around them. And that aura is innately part of your nervous system. And so therefore we are co-regulating each other, right? So some people have a larger capacity to co-regulate others, and these are these highly sensitive people.
The interesting question, like, I don't know. Okay, that's interesting thing. I can say about that for sure is this is a major thing like that I started to realize when I was doing Zen,
Mm,
which was the extent to which we do impact one another in those subtle or unconscious
yeah,
ways, you
yeah,
know? Um, we talked about it before, but I can remember like if you do a Zen retreat, like it can be painful,
sure.
right? Those are demanding practices, they push you, right? And I can remember like being in one of the retreats and like, you're in this thing, it can be painful, it can be stressful. You're challenging yourself, right? To
Yeah,
grow.
yeah.
Um, so I can remember that I felt this wave of calm pour over me in the midst of all of this. And I was
Mm,
like, that's so interesting. Where did that come from? And then I just saw Hosokawa Roshi, the Zen master's feet, just walking, into the thing to take his seat. And I was like, that's
yeah,
amazing,
yeah,
actually. Look at that. He's like putting out such a strong, they use the word ki or chi, energy in that sense, right? Ki, the Japanese version of energy, and chi, the Chinese, right? But he was putting that out so strongly that you could just see it affected everybody.
yeah,
And it was very eye-opening. And then as I went through my retreats, doing that, because I did a lot of them back in my 20s, that was where I built my spiritual foundation for myself,
yeah,
as we talked about here and there. But like, you could be in the retreat, again, we talked about these things too, and you'd realize we don't, they talked, we talk about, oh, that person's really struggling. You could realize that afterwards. They didn't say anything. It was
right.
all new. And you just start trying to dump the positive vibes towards them and,
Yeah,
try to help them out. Like it's very real. It's very real.
yeah. And so as adults and I'm gonna venture to say that the most of the people who are listening to this have some sense of cultivation, some sense of self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
That they are doing some kind of work on themselves. So if you're doing that, good for you. Two thumbs up. Um, but I believe that the when you begin to do that in your own life, you begin to cultivate yourself, you have a larger capacity to regulate your own system and thereby regulate others. And so
Mhm.
if you find that people feel good being around you, they come to you with problems, they seek your counsel, or maybe you're a healer in some type, or you are even working in HR, that you're this kind of like regulator, you're the stabilizer, and that comes from that. And conversely, if that is never developed and you're one of these disorganized attachment style kids, you're going to grow up to be very likely without any input, disorganized attachment style adult.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that you try to go through for, I mean, for all of us. I think the
Yeah.
one part is being honest, like saying, okay, maybe I do have some features of this, and we're giving a description to learn from
Yeah.
it. I feel like every bit of like something we throw out to people, whether it's a set of Buddhist ideas or Taoist ideas or Sufi or, whatever it is, Kabbalistic, all these different things we talk about, and so that we can all like self-reflect on it and think, okay, what part of this is useful and meaningful for me?
Yeah.
And then we did psych things too, right? Because okay, we present a whole theory here and you get to kind of go back and say, what can I learn from this? And a big part of what you're saying is that the better you're able to regulate whatever these needs are in yourself,
Hmm.
then aura or not aura or chi or ki or whatever your prana, whatever you want to call it, it's going to like ripple out
Yeah.
and be better for others. And I think when I first started doing the Zen thing, I started to realize like as far as the nervous system, goes, everyone's talking about their nervous system now everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to regulate your nervous system. But I know when I was doing Zen, I thought, wow, this is just, I thought about it almost like electrical magnetic thing.
Yeah.
I realized that I can handle more and more charge kind of,
Sure.
right? And the charges don't freak me out.
Yeah.
By having more and more of this charge, I'm okay. It's almost like a capacitor if you want to get like electromagnetic or engineering or something. I can handle more charge, which means I can handle more stuff and still be
Mm.
fine. And that was part of like Zen training for me for sure.
Yeah.
And that goes on to the present day, right?
Hmm.
All right. All right. So should we do them in adulthood?
I think we should pause.
You want to pause and save it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Just time wise, or else we'll have to stop and whatnot. So we'll pause here and we'll let it roll. And next time we'll pick up with the adulthood because it's a little bit of a longer discussion anyway. So we want to give it the space that it needs. So
All right, that's true. Okay,
yeah,
and then we'll probably do like what this means psychologically and spiritually, right? So
yeah,
we'll to
absolutely.
come episodes to come on this.
Episodes to come. Yeah. Well, Eric, as always, thank you for rocking. Always appreciate it. Audience, thank you for listening. Tune in to the things. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We got content coming out like very regularly now. So, we're trying to build a brand here a little bit. We have our retreat coming up, which is sold out in person, but we're offering it online. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to hit us up at jinandtantra@gmail.com or leave a comment in the YouTube section. Share our work. It doesn't, cost anything, but it definitely helps, us reach more people and keeps us motivated to continue doing what we're doing. And so if you find use in what we're doing, please share. But thanks either way. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.